hello everybody. Welcome to another edition of Jazz Video Guy Live. And I want to say hello to our special guest today. Sir, could you please identify yourself?
Hi, Brett. This is Bill Cunliffe. It's really nice to be here with you.
Well, Bill, it's really nice to have you. And we started out with some of your music. We'll work backwards here. The first solo piano thing you played was a composition by the great Mary Lou Williams. Bill, can you tell us something about your experience with Mary Lou Williams, how that happened? And for people who don't know who she is, which sadly some people don't, who was Mary Lou Williams?
Well, she's probably the first woman pianist in jazz to really make an impact on the landscape. She started out as a traditional swing era player with Andy Kirk and the Clouds of Joy. But like many musicians, and particularly black musicians, they were interested in actually surviving in the era that they were in. She also arranged and composed, and she wrote a song called Roll 'Em and did an arrangement of it, and Benny Goodman recorded that. So that was kind of her first big arrangement composition. But she was well known as a performer. She grew up in Kansas City, but moved to New York and was there with Monk and Bud Powell and Errol Garner, and knew and hung out with all of them. And they all loved her. She was, although she started out as a swing and boogie woogie piano player, she quickly adapted to the 52nd Street scene and learned and became a real exponent of bebop. And she continued to develop that. She had a retirement or two from music, but she returned in the 70s with a bang, teaching at Duke University, which was my first experience with her. Then recording new again for Inner City Records. She's got some really great things with them. And she did a recital with Cecil Taylor that was released on the Pablo label in, I believe, 1970, 77, 78. So she had an impact on me because not only was she deeply a traditional and rooted in gospel and blues, she was also fiercely contemporary and never stopped growing or changing or evolving.
Yeah, she was a remarkable woman. I mean, when you consider she hung out in the bebop days with Monk and all the cats. I mean, she was really the only woman who was part of that scene, and unfortunately, she has kind of sunk into the background there. But I first actually heard of her. She played with the Dizzy Gillespie Big Band at Newport Jazz Festival in 1957, and they recorded live at that gig her composition Zodiac Suite.
Zodiac Suite, yeah.
And I said, well, who wrote this? You know, and as it turns out, there was a woman in the band, a great trombone player named Melba Liston, but Mary Lou Williams. So that's a good place to start studying with Mary Lou Williams, Bill. And since then, you have played with literally a who's who of people. You've been a teacher. You teach now. You've written books, jazz education books, piano books, and you've also done soundtracks. Before we got started, I asked you a question about how you got to L.A., and you said, "Well, that's quite a story." So we saved that for the show. So here we are. How did you get to L.A.?
Well, I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was actually really enjoying living there. It was in the late 80s. I had a relationship there that was going pretty well for a while. I was playing a couple of nights a week, a duo piano gig at the Netherland Plaza Hotel in downtown Cincinnati, and we got away with murder. We played whatever we wanted, and the rule was if it's not too loud, you can do it. So we just followed the Hank Jones rule: play softly and carry a big stick. I was also doing commercials or jingle work in Cincinnati, writing music for commercials and industrial films. And the gig I liked the most was playing a couple nights a week at the club on the other side of town, the Greenwich Tavern. And I was very fortunate to be a member of the house trio there. I played with, a who's who of jazz musicians. James Moody, Art Farmer, Clifford Jordan, Bobby Watson, Kenny Burrell, Bob Mintzer, Bob Berg, Art Blakey, Freddie Hubbard, Slide Hampton, Woody Shaw. It was amazing. It was just really an incredible experience.
And how did you get to LA?
Well, I think sometimes the world tells you what to do. I like to set my own path rather than being buffeted about by the winds of change. But within a year, the Greenwich Tavern gig ended. I broke up with my girlfriend. I auditioned for a gig at the Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati, and I didn't get it. I was fired from my gig at the Netherland Plaza, which was actually a great story because I'm not sure that happened today. I was playing with this great piano player, Randy Villars, who still lives there, great pianist. And we were getting into all kinds of stuff. We played whatever we wanted to play. And we were playing at Gruse's Mountain Dance, and that gets pretty loud. And the assistant manager came over and said, if you guys don't be quiet, I'm going to shut these pianos down. And so I started playing this. And she said, "Oh, really? That's how you feel." She recognized the tune. And then I got a call the next day from the booking agent. He was chain smoker, drank too much coffee. He trembled when he spoke. "Bill, this is very unprofessional what you did. I'm very, very disappointed in you, Bill. I'm going to have to ask you to turn in your resignation." That was it. Then I I was writing commercials for what we call Full House in Cincinnati. And on my boss's desk, there was a note for a film scoring workshop in LA with the great Earl Hagen, who, as we all know, wrote a lot of great music for television. And he also wrote Harlem Nocturne. Beautiful, beautiful song. And he clearly was imitating Duke Ellington, as he admitted to me later on. I moved out to LA to Silver Lake, lived in a house with some friends for a couple of months, and went to Dante's and Alphonse's and heard all these great players. And I was like, this is it for me. I'm moving.
Yeah. Well, you've been there, 30 years now?
Uh-huh.
It brings up an interesting point. You obviously a man of great talent and possibility. When you moved to LA, you had some experience playing with the Cats, studied with Mary Lou, got into film scoring. But you come to LA without a gig. How do you establish yourself? How do you find work out there when you're basically an unknown?
Hang out, reach out to people. Don't ask them for anything, but just reach out to them and become interested in what they are interested in. I was lucky to have gone to the Eastman School of Music, and there were a whole lot of Eastman guys out here. Steve Bramson, the film composer, Bernie Dressel, the drummer, Rob Lockhart and Brian Scanlon, the saxophone players, Rick Shaw, the bass player, And so I reached out to them and started working almost immediately, because I think when you first move to a city, you I'm sorry, my phone
Okay.
rang.
No problem.
When you move to a city, I think initially you take whatever gig there is. And my friend Scott Healy, of course, very famously took a gig, a wedding with Jimmy Vivino, the guitar player. And then Jimmy Vivino got a call a few months later. He needed to put together a band for this brand new TV show. He didn't never heard of the guy, but it turned out to be Conan O'Brien. And so Scott did that gig for 15, 20 years.
Wow.
I didn't have that kind of luck, but with doing a lot of the casuals that were out there, I made a living initially. I worked with whatever singer would have me. One of them being Nikki Harris, Gene Harris's daughter, who's a great, great singer. And John Clayton and Jeff Hamilton were on the gig. And so I got to know them. And I said, guys, I know you from Montreux, Alexander. I'm a huge, huge fan of your music. And so soon after that, the call came in from John to do a few gigs with them. And I joined the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra and the Clayton Brothers Quintet. And I did that with them for over 10 years. So, LA is interesting. I certainly had older friends that were moving into the studio game, and I was never super excited about it, but I was like, well, I like what LA does to you in the sense that you get exposed to a whole lot of different types of music. And Kenny Drew said this about Europe. He left New York for Europe in the early 60s. And of course, Kenny Drew, Moment's Notice, Blue Train. I mean, a really, really underrated piano player. And of course, his son, I was a big fan of his son, the great jazz pianist, Kenny Drew Jr. But Kenny Drew moved to Europe because he said, I get to exercise many parts of my musical brain. I get to write music, I get to arrange, I get to play different types of music. I'm not just stuck in one bag. And because New York is about excellence, it sort of can challenge you to be a specialist in one area. And I guess maybe I lived in New York on 2 separate occasions and I loved it. But when I would come back to LA, I would be like, oh, great, I get to work on this arrangement. I get to play this gig. I think the versatility of it on a certain level kind of appealed to me, especially as a young person. So I forgot what your question was. How did we get here?
Yeah, well, that's cool. This show is an improvisation, so that's not an issue. In terms of your playing, I mean, you played with so many people, but I was reading your bio, and a couple of names jumped out at me. I just want you to share your thoughts and memories of these people. One was Buddy Rich.
Well, that was a fun ride, actually. And, the older I get, the more and more I revere him and esteem him and say, well, I could have made more of that experience. And I think that it's a challenge because going on the road, you're not paid for well. The work is very difficult. And Buddy, with his genius and his sensitivity and caring about the music, could be a challenge to work with at times. I got to hear the band in 1983 at Gillies in Dayton, Ohio. And I had a couple of friends on the band, Dave Carpenter, the great bass player, Mike Davis, the trombone player. And I had never really heard Buddy's band before. I mean, I heard some of the commercial things, and I wasn't really nuts about them. But when I heard the band live, I was blown away how great it was. Buddy did a lot of original music, and it was just swinging hard. And so a lot of the charts were very creative and interesting. And so Dave called me a week later, and I was a professor at Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio, 10-year track job. I could have stayed there for the rest of my life and had a comfortable life in, the middle of the heartland. But he said to me, hey, man, and he was quoting Buddy on this, you want to come out and play some music? And there was an adjective after that, or that I won't disclose. And I thought about it for about a day, and I called him back. I said, Dave, I'm out of here. I'm doing it. So I told my chairman I was going to quit. I packed all my stuff up in boxes and went out with Buddy Rich. And I was there for a year and a half. And kind of the highlights of it, there were a lot of highlights. And I think that, first of all, the highlight was because Buddy was in a good mood a lot of the time because he loved playing with Dave Carpenter. Those of you who don't know Dave Carpenter, go on the internet and look up his music. In particular, the things I love about Dave are the music he did with Alan Holdsworth, the trio. Spectacular, just creative and interesting and upright and electric and funk, pop, jazz, fusion. Dave could do everything, and he was a monster at all of it. And there are certain bass players, when you play a note, they immediately respond to you and interact with you. Ray Brown was one of those who I got to play with. John Clayton's another one. Christian McBride is like that. And Dave Carpenter was like that. He could hear what you were doing, and you were immediately in dialogue with him. And it was so thrilling. So, again, we were talking about Dave and Buddy. And also, Buddy, he came up to me, or he didn't come up to me. He said, hey, Piero, get up here. And I walked up very gingerly to the front of the bus. He was in his bathrobe, smoking a joint, I think, probably. And he said, Piero, I hear you write. And I said, yes, I do, buddy. And he said, okay, 1 o'clock jump. Get the original piano solo from the 1930s recording. Do the backgrounds from the 50s recording with suites. Updated with some of the shout chorus. You got all those right, don't you? And I was sitting out on the bus with 10 cassettes and 3-4 CDs. And I was like, I don't. And he goes, explodes with rage. He goes, God damn it, you better find them. God damn you, you better learn Basie better than you know yourself. Get out of here. And dismissed me to the back of the bus. And after I recovered from that, I did the homework and wrote the chart, and he loved it. And he played it every night after that.
Yeah. Wow. What a great story. Let's jump over to, before we talk more about your arranging and all your other activities, I want to play something really, really beautiful, a solo piano version of a song called A Time for Love. Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Now we started the show, the pre-show with your big band doing "I'm Late." Uh, was that from Focus, the Stan Getz album by Eddie Sauter?
Yeah, that piece actually it's derived from that, and that's actually derived from the Bartok music for percussion and celesta and strings. Um, I've kind of have always loved classical music. In fact, I loved classical music before I loved jazz. And in my big band, I've always played a lot of classical music. I have a version of the Prokofiev Piano Concerto Number 3. I've got a version of the Three Cornered Hat by Manuel de Falla, and the Solfeggetto by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, an underrated composer because his dad was such a big shot. And that was a Harry Allen. I brought Harry Allen in to work at Cal State Fullerton with my students. And I'm a huge fan of Harry. We've been friends for many years. And he's the perfect guy for this. Are you kidding me? No one could do the Stan Getz thing updated or, just different. That's all. So that was Harry Allen on the tenor saxophone.
Yeah, Harry's a great player. He's extremely underrated. Not enough people know about Harry Allen for sure. Now, in terms of your writing, Bill, in addition to arranging for big band, you've done stuff for orchestra, chamber groups, choir, the Cincinnati Pops, Illinois Philharmonic. I mean, just incredible list of people. You told me yesterday you're working on a composition for a competition in Europe right now. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's one of the German radio symphony orchestras conducted by Marin Alsop. My teacher at Eastman School, Bill Dobbins, told me about it, and it's a tribute to Leonard Bernstein. And it's a 12-minute orchestral piece, kind of not based on anything that Lenny wrote, but sort of the spirit of Leonard Bernstein, which my own small way, I pay tribute to every day because he was a masterful classical pianist and a masterful composer and arranger in the jazz idiom and in the classical idiom. So, Leonard and I were both born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, so we share that in common. Old mill town in northeastern Massachusetts. I love Lenny's music, and I needed, I'm a little bit, I sort of need projects. I don't always, I'm a self-starter, but I usually need some kind of impetus. So this is a concert work for symphony orchestra, and I'm kind of jumping back into that, and I'm going to do it and see what happens. It's, of course, as a composer these days, if nothing happens with it, then I'll repurpose it for orchestra or big band or concert band or solo piano, whatever. There's always things you can do with the music that you write. So I'm just looking, in this year of COVID, I've been musically not really grooving super hard in some ways. I've been a little bit shut down because I'm not intersecting with people the way I want to. So it's maybe a way out of this thing a little bit for me.
Well, we all need something to hold us together during these times for sure. But regarding Leonard Bernstein, when I was a kid, many years ago, many decades ago, Leonard Bernstein had a television show called Young People's Concerts. And he played, he was the conductor of the New York Philharmonic at the time, and he played symphonic works, and he talked about them. He would explain them. And that was very special because at that time, not too much classical music on TV, not very much now, except for public television. But here was a guy with a big personality and a big heart who was very good at explaining the music and turning people on to classical music. And that's something, we don't really have anymore. I like to think of Billy Taylor in that way as well. especially when Billy Taylor was on CBS Sunday Morning profiling musicians. He brought people into the music that probably didn't know anything about jazz at all, but they liked Billy Taylor, big heart, great explainer. Same thing with Leonard Bernstein. And I'm sorry that there's no one around today who can reach an audience like that. I mean, the internet and television have changed so much since then. But
I just want to comment on that because I actually think the division of the audience, the sort of micro division of it, has in some ways brought us apart. But there are people like Yo-Yo Ma who are completely embracing jazz and pop and in their work, and bringing that to audiences, and symphony orchestras now are reaching out in terms of the LA Phil, and a lot of the orchestras now are reaching out that way, but it's not reaching the big audiences that Lenny did, and I'm not sure that's possible right now. But I think there's a lot of people doing what Lenny did in a certain way. Christian McBride, there's an orchestra in LA, the Symphonic Jazz Orchestra, and they have a bass concerto that Christian McBride performed. So there's a lot of great crossover happening now. And, I got to play Rhapsody in Blue with various orchestras, and I would improvise, on it. And I have a version of the Concerto in F that I do the same thing on. But I got that idea from Gary Burton and Makoto Ozone because they did that about 10, 15 years ago. So there's a lot of it happening now. We just don't hear about it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem for me today. There's just too much. I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I love movies. I can access so many films on Netflix and Amazon Prime and YouTube. And just so the question becomes, what do I watch? I've got a hard drive full of movies that I've downloaded. And so I don't know. It's just a little bit overwhelming at this point. It is.
When you were a kid, you had 5 or 6 records and you knew every note on them. And today you have 200 gig of tunes on your computer and you don't know most of it.
Yeah. Well, but on the other side of the coin, nothing like YouTube when I was a kid. A young student now can go on YouTube and watch Oscar Peterson and Art Tatum and McCoy Tyner and Keith Jarrett and Herbie Hancock. I mean, it's fantastic. Speaking of education, let's talk about, because that's one of the things that you do. How did you get into education? And let's talk about some of the materials you've done. You on your website, I think you have a link to some lessons, and you've written books and done videos. So how does education, jazz education and piano, play a part in your life, Bill?
Well, I was a single guy up until about 8 years ago, and so I never had any kids of my own. And Terrell Stafford invited me to apply for the job, a jazz studies position at the Temple University in Philadelphia. And that was very intriguing to me. First of all, I always think of Philly and Boston, where I grew up, as kind of sister cities. They're both kind of not New York, but they both have an ancient, really rich history and a jazz tradition and a cultural tradition. And at that point, I was single and I didn't have any kids of my own. And I was feeling something missing from my life in terms of young people and connecting with them. And I think that that's what appealed to me. So I got into teaching at Temple, and I love Temple. I have a great relationship with them. I've written a number of works for their orchestras and big bands. And in fact, I just did a piece for them with Joey DiFrancesco that they did last week. They have been in person, kind of forging on. It's kind of amazing. We at Fullerton have not been. We're COVID closed, but we're doing online, and we're going to open up hopefully in about 3 weeks, which I think everyone's looking forward to. But then the opportunity came to go back to LA, and it just felt like the right thing for me to do. So I've been at Fullerton 14 years. I direct the big band, run the jazz department, teach piano, and teach jazz history. And actually, jazz history has been the most enjoyable part of it because I'm kind of catching up with the music I love. I teach now seminars on the music of John Coltrane and Miles Davis. And in particular, I'm kind of getting more acquainted with a part of their repertoire that I didn't know that much about. In Coltrane's case, the last couple of years of his life, and with Miles, kind of, there's a book by Bob Gluck, who's a great historian who got his craft at the Crane School of Music in Potsdam, New York. He did a book about the Lost Quintet, which is kind of his definition of the Miles Davis from 1968 to 1970. For me, that's a real unknown and a real mysterious. Joey D, my man. Wow. How did it go at Temple? Joey, did you have fun? Anyway, Joey's online, so I had to say hello to him. I also have to say I dabble in the B3, but Joey is the greatest. And I'm so happy to see him. So I'm learning about Miles Davis's music, actually that mysterious time from 1968 to 1970 around Bitches Brew and In a Silent Way. And I'm really catching up on that because that was really the transition of jazz into jazz rock fusion and kind of a very amazing time, in America, the late 60s, for all these riots and really the ascent of the Black Rights Movement, which was a really necessary thing to happen. And so I just loved it. I've really enjoyed that. That's been kind of a highlight of the year for me.
Yeah, that was a magical time. That's actually, I saw Miles for the first time. I guess it was like 69. It was with the band was Wayne and Chick and Dave Holland and Jack. Right before he made the transition to the next thing there. And wow. Actually, it was on a triple bill at the Fillmore East with Steve Miller Band and Neil Young. I mean, that was a different time. And then 2 years later, I was living in East Village at the time. I saw the infamous Miles at Fillmore gig. And that was the band at the first incarnation with Keith Jarrett and Chick Corea and Steve Grossman. Airto was there that night. I mean, that just blew me away. And then a couple of years after that, I saw Miles at the Cafe Au Go-Go. The band had morphed into Keith Jarrett, Gary Bartz, Michael Henderson took over the bass chair, and that turned that whole thing around. I mean, that was just the evolution of that period that Miles went through and the music went through. It was really exciting to be there and check that out and witness that. I mean, one of the things I dislike about the commercialism that everything has to have a title and jazz fusion. I mean, that's, it's a fusion of jazz and rock, it's music. It's Miles Davis. It's like Duke Ellington said, once they label he said to Dizzy Gillespie, because when Bird and Diz in the early mid-40s were playing this new music, they dubbed it bebop. And which is a ridiculous word. It's stuck. We still refer to that kind of music as bebop. But Duke Ellington said to Dizzy Gillespie, once they label your music, that's a problem. And unfortunately, in our commercial culture, you're either a jazz musician. You were talking before about the crossover between classical music and jazz. But, Yo-Yo Ma is a classical cellist. Well, no, he's a lot more than that. He's a musician who plays different kinds of music. You are a pianist who wears many hats, who plays different kinds of music. But I can't change the world. I can only try to do something positive while I'm on this planet. And speaking about doing something positive, you did a wonderful Let's talk about another aspect of your creativity. You did a wonderful film score for a film with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Can you tell us about that project and just film scoring in general?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. He he saw my big band perform at an LA Jazz Society event, and then I heard from him, and like what often happens, uh, a film company will hire a composer, and it doesn't quite work out, and so they need to find someone else. So his people contacted me and asked me if I would write the score for this film on the shoulders of giants. And this was a really compelling story about the most successful black barnstorming basketball team, the Harlem Wrens, which was short for the Renaissance Ballroom. That was a ballroom up in Harlem where they would play basketball and then do live concerts afterwards. Or maybe it was before. I don't remember the order, but it was that whole synchronicity of sports and jazz that engaged Kareem, and it engaged me too, because I was a real fan of basketball. I grew up with the Celtics and Bill Russell and John Havlicek, and I love basketball. I was a horrible basketball player, but I love to do it. And basketball is one of the few sports that has a rhythm. You know, the rhythm, the sound of basketball is, I don't know, there's something about it, the ball hitting the ground. And so when Kareem came to me, it all made total sense that this would be a swing era sounding score. And of course, it was his idea to do that. But in 1946, when the NBA was founded, or 48, 46, they did not allow black players. So the black players had to barnstorm, tour the country, and there was also I don't think there was any professional black basketball league like there was a black baseball league. I don't think there really was. So like the Harlem Globetrotters were a touring organization. The Harlem Wrens were. And I believe in the big showdown, the Harlem Wrens played the Harlem Globetrotters and the Wrens won. So that kind of settled it, according to some people, that the Harlem Wrens were the greatest team of all time. And this really compelling story that Kareem put together was a story of the team and how it evolved. And it needed a swing score. So Kareem was like big band, two beat, Lunsford, Count Basie, do it. And it was a lot of fun to do. I hired kind of a slightly smaller version of my big band. It wasn't 16, it was like 12 or 13, because you want a little tighter. The beat in the 30s and 40s was a little bit tighter. It wasn't big and broad, maybe like you think about Count Basie, April in Paris. Boo, doo, 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 doo. In the 30s and 40s, it was a little bit closer. The attacks are a little shorter. It's a little more precise. And of course, the sound of the toms to me was the basketball hitting the ground. That completely compelled me. So when you hear a basketball game, I hear the big band. I always did, because I always heard the drums. And so it was just a real labor of love. It was really fun to do.
Yeah. Now, a couple of questions. First of all, Kareem is a huge jazz fan. Has been since he was a kid. Those pictures of him with Thelonious Monk. I've never had the honor of meeting Kareem. I admire him so much. What was it like working with him? Could you share something about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the man?
Well, Brett, it's sort of interesting. It goes along with like when Miles Davis first started recording as a leader. He sort of dictated how things would go. In fact, you'll watch some videos of him, and there's a video of the famous quintet where Herbie is soloing, and then Miles kind of very very quietly moves over to the piano. They're playing all blues, and Miles in the high register goes, very slowly, like, okay, Herbie, time to get to the melody. And so, moving my camera, I've got some sun here and I can't fix it.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, yeah, it's like a halo over my head or something.
Well, you're an angelic figure. It's okay.
So, anyways, Miles started out as not really a controlling band leader, but yeah, I mean, he did control the vibe and the tone of what was going on. But when it gets into the 60s and 70s, Miles sort of let the band leader, the people around him, he was a much looser band leader, a less controlling band leader. And when Train was with Miles, he played a certain way, but when he worked with Monk was completely non-controlling, and Monk and Train would hang out all the time and talk about music. And so that was when Train started to really come into his own as an improviser, according to some historians. Kareem's instructions on this were not really specific. They were really general. He didn't give me a lot of direction. He just kind of said, big band, 2-beat, Lunsford, bassy, swinging, hot. And then for the other parts of the film that required underscore, kind of more sensitive moments, I was left to my own devices. He didn't really have much to say about it. He was pretty happy with what I did, so it worked out okay.
That's great. Now back to your playing. You've recently done a recording with two of my favorite contemporary musicians, and that's Vinnie Colaiuta on drums and John Patitucci on bass. A piano trio album. Can you tell us something about that, Bill?
Yeah. About 2 years ago, I established a relationship with a record label here in LA called Relocating Records. And it was started by a really...
Okay. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties today. I apologize for these. Unfortunately, one of the bad things about the internet here is that sometimes it doesn't work as planned. So I'll stitch these two things together. And Bill, back to your. You mentioned you mentioned the label. Continue from there about the recording, please.
Yeah. So Pero really want to, first of all, he's bringing in these fantastic musicians to play with Andrea, which was a real privilege for me. But he wanted to do more to develop the artists because he wanted more. He didn't want the label just to be about, his wife. He wanted to develop it because he's a very curious guy. He loves music, and he loves good music, which is really great for an owner of a record label to really care about the music. That's really a luxury. It's really special. So he did an album with Rick Margitza, great tenor player who was with Miles for a while, and we were doing some things with Andrea, and Vinny and John were in the studio, and Pero mentioned to me offhandedly, gee, it would be great to do some more things. And I was like, can we do trio? And he was like, great, you got it. But it was not really a planned thing. We really only had about 4 or 5 hours to do this. So I know that these guys both recorded with Wayne and with Chick. So I thought, well, let me do a couple of their tunes because I really love music. Anna Maria, a tune of Wayne's that I've played for years. I love that tune. And Chick Corea's The One Step, which is one of his less challenging tunes. He writes very, very difficult music to play. You're My Everything. I tried to learn that after I found out that Chick passed away, and it's really impossible. It's really hard. You go from one change to another. It's really rapid fire. Um, and then we just did a bunch of things that we knew. We used almost no music. We only used music for those two tunes. Everything else was standards that we knew. Seven Steps to Heaven, Good Morning Heartache, Just in Time, Baya by Monk. They were all things we kind of knew. So it came together real quickly, and it was sort of like, those old Prestige records that Miles did. Miles wanted to get out of his contract with Prestige so he could go to Columbia. So he was like, well, we're going to play the whole repertoire in 2 days. So he did Working, Steaming, Cooking, Relaxing, all in a couple of days, evidently. And he just played his repertoire. So that's kind of what we did.
Well, some of the great recordings in jazz history have been, for lack of a better word, just spontaneous. No plan, just go into the studio, and because of the unique dynamics of a group of people playing together, magic sometimes happens. Not all the time, but a lot of time. And hopefully you guys had some magic in the studio that day.
Well, the thing with these guys, it's kind of funny. That whole thing you talked about labeling music can sort of, I knew John, his things with Chick and kind of his earlier work. I knew that he was a great, great upright player and a stone cold jazz guy. He's a little younger than me, but he was brought up in the tradition. Vinny, I didn't know that quite so much because I knew him more as a pop drummer and an LA studio player. But then I heard him with Herbie Hancock at the Hollywood Bowl. And I was like, holy cow, this guy's a jazz player. He's totally, he gets it. And so I am the composer in residence at All Saints Church in Pasadena, which is one of the biggest churches in America. They're great people. They're very politically liberal, social conscious. And I've done some jazz concerts there, and I saw Vinny walking across the campus a few years ago, and I was like, Vinny, Bill Cunliffe, I'm a big fan of yours. I love your playing. I know we do some things at the church. Would you do something? And he said, yeah. I said, it's a very vibrant church with a lot of echo. And he's like, that's cool. I got a small kid. I can do it, blah, blah, blah. So I always thought, wow, it would be great to play with Vinny. So when John and Vinny were in the studio, I was like, this is serendipity, So I knew that both of these guys understood the music I wanted to make. And with all the versatility we talked about on this show, my favorite music is bebop and hard bop and post bop. It's who I am. I can't fight it. I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to embrace it, especially at this stage in my life, and try to put that wine into whatever bottle it works.
Well, it's definitely working. We're enjoying the results of that, for sure.
Thanks.
Bill, I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. We've had some technical difficulties, such as the nature of this medium, but it's really been fun hanging out with you and getting into your music. And we're going to go out with something from your big band. You did you play sometimes at Vitello's, the restaurant best known for the Robert Blake story. We won't get into that, but what can I say except come back next week? And Bill, thank you so much for being with us today.
Brett, it was really fun hanging out with you. I hope to see you in person one day.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Great. Jeff Bonnell, Joe LaMarga.